None of that. Okay. So everyone's just seeing the single slide. This drives me nuts when PowerPoint jumps into this. I have two screens. So you see one slide, right? That says Agrivoltaics.
You are good to go. Looks
All right.
great.
We're talking to you, Colorado 350 or 350 Colorado, your regenerative agriculture committee, as I understand it. Let me get my thing. Okay. So the agenda that Allison and I talked about going through with you today was one, why worry about agrivoltaics? Why are we even working on it? And then we're going to introduce you to Jack's Solar Garden and Colorado Agrivoltaics Learning Center. So that you know the expertise and the resources that could be available to you for collaboration. And then Allison's going to jump into the policy side of stuff with state and local solar agrivoltaic legislation. And she'll connect it to our understanding of regenerative agriculture. And then if time permits and the interest is there, I can talk about opportunities to scale agrivoltaics. So why agrivoltaics? So the problem is that the traditional solar developments are just, especially one in this photo, utility scale and lots of acres that is just bare ground or seed turf. And then it's maintained the cheapest way possible, which is with pesticides or mowing. What happens to the land underneath it, the decrease in water retention, decrease in soil stability, reduction in carbon sequestration for climate change, and then a decreased habitat for pollinators and birds and wildlife. So the solution, or a solution, is agriculture with co-located photovoltaics or solar panels, and that equals agrivoltaics. And the solar panels, you need to elevate, and we'll get into that when we describe Jack's Solar Farm. But with that, with the solar panels, you have a decrease in the amount of evaporation of moisture from the soil. And so you need less irrigation. So very helpful in this arid West. And with solar panels, you get more shade. And with more shade, you have a decrease in the thermal stress on crops or animals or farm workers that are working on there. I wanted to show you a couple quick animations that describe the microclimates for agricultural crops, and then also about livestock and farm workers and how do they benefit. These are about a minute each, so here we go.
Thinking about going solar, but not sure whether it's worth it for your home.
Well, switch the screen.
At Jack's Solar Garden, the space between rows of solar panels is divided into 3 crop beds, each with a different microclimate. Row A gets morning sun and afternoon
And
shade.
we're just seeing
plants that prefer cooler temperatures.
the PowerPoint.
You're not seeing it? You're not seeing the video?
Just
Oh, drats, man.
You just have to go to share again and then switch to a different.
Row C gets morning shade and
Right.
afternoon sun when temperatures are higher. This is where to put your heat tolerant plants. And solar panels also alter the soil moisture by region.
There we go.
Thanks for telling me, Allison.
No problem.
I was really enjoying it.
The space between the solar panels is divided into 3 crop beds, each with a different microclimate. Row A gets morning sun and afternoon shade. The plants that prefer cooler temperatures and more shade in hot climates grow well in this environment. Row B receives the most sunlight throughout the middle of the day. Sun-loving plants thrive here. Row C gets morning shade and afternoon sun when temperatures are higher. This is where to put your heat-tolerant plants. Solar panels also alter the soil moisture by redirecting summer rains and morning dew, keeping the moisture content in the topsoil highest in rows A and C, while row B exhibits similar levels to open lanes. The shade from solar panels slows the evaporation rate of moisture from the soil, meaning that less irrigation is needed for crops, preserving our precious water resources. Single-axis tracking panels cycle sun and shade over the plants, reducing their heat and water stresses. At the same time, the plants release moisture from their leaves, cooling the panels and enabling them to work more efficiently. When we pair solar panels with the right plants, both enjoy a cooler environment and higher production. This is agrivoltaics.
Okay, and now we'll get into the people and animals.
Crops aren't the only beneficiaries of agrivoltaics. Livestock and people can benefit from solar panels too. Elevated panels allow people and animals to move more freely throughout a solar array. Shade from panels can reduce temperatures by several degrees and can prevent livestock from overheating. Heat-stressed cattle have lower immune functions, leading to an increase in disease and billions of dollars lost annually. But shaded cattle exhibit lower respiration rates and lower body temperatures. Shaded cattle eat more, and their growth efficiency is improved compared to animals in the full sun. Recent studies found that forage under solar panels is of higher quality, meaning more protein and higher energy content compared to open pastures. Additional data shows that farm workers are up to 35 times more likely to die from heat-related illness than workers in general. But people's skin can be 18 degrees cooler when working in agrivoltaics, which can prevent heat illnesses and deaths of farm laborers. Creating space for larger animals and people within a solar array will provide benefits to our agricultural industry.
Great videos.
Yeah, I think it illustrates the, can you guys see the slideshow again?
Not yet.
Not yet. Let me stop share. Let me start share. Whoops. Share. Okay. You seeing it now? Okay, one thumbs up. Yeah, I think it does a really good job of illustrating the benefits, the co-benefits of, well, what they didn't talk about was this is a whole new revenue source for farmers as well as the benefits that you just learned about in the animation, selling electrons as well as livestock or crops. So agrivoltaics have been happening all over the world. Jack's Solar Garden happens to be the biggest research agrivoltaic farm in the US, but we started in Germany. I mean, agrivoltaics started in Germany in 1980s, but then really kicked off in 2000. They've got some examples of really high elevated solar panels that they can drive combines through, and they're growing wheat. And Australia's got a lot of sheep grazing. China has the largest agrivoltaic as far as generating electricity, 1 gigawatt. So it's about 1,000 times bigger than what's at Jack's, and they're growing goji berries there. Japan's got about 2,000 different agrivoltaic farms, shiitake mushrooms and other cultural crops, mainly as a result of Fukushima and trying to shift off of nuclear energy. India's growing vegetables. There's just examples all over the world of where agrivoltaics are happening. France, grapes, Netherlands, raspberries. So it's not unique to the US. And then now I want to show you a bit about Jack's Solar Garden. One, we've got lots of events there, live music, yoga. We have lots of yoga there this summer, different Saturday morning sessions. We've got research going on. We have CSU, University of Arizona researchers there a lot. And Wish Gardens. This is the owner, CEO of Wish Garden Herbs that's doing a lot of research on growing herbs under solar panels, art classes, and so lots happening there. This is in, does everyone know where Jack's Solar Garden is? It's in Boulder County on 95th Street, just about a mile south of Longmont. Free tour, I mean, not free, there's tours there on Saturday morning so that you can sign up for and Allison can tell you about. So we got lots of partnerships happening at Jack's. One, as I mentioned, the research, making it the largest research agrivoltaic facility. CSU's doing a lot of different things. They're measuring soil moisture, I'm having a mind blank. Light intensity, some photosynthesis that you can measure in the leaves, carbon contents, lots of stuff like that. And then University of Arizona is getting into it a lot to compare row A versus row B versus row C with 6-foot panels versus 8-foot panels. The higher you elevate those solar panels, the more expensive it is. So it takes a lot of steel. And then Wish Garden Herbs doing their research. Sprout City Farms, you may have heard of. They've been growing thousands of pounds of food at Jack's Solar Garden. And they've got a CSA going on there now. National Renewable Energy Lab, big partner there. And doing one and just getting the project designed and built, and two, doing ongoing research there with prairie land type stuff. And then Audubon Rockies, up until recently, Jack's Solar Garden had the largest Habitat Hero garden of Audubon Rockies. We just got overtaken by another agrivoltaic facility though. And then the subscribers that signed up to buy the electricity, which is critical for the farmer. You got to sell that electricity to raise the capital to build the solar electricity plant. Boulder County and City of Boulder bought many years in advance of electricity to meet their own climate action goals. Premier members, so Valley, this is who I go to the bank with. And then pot shops or marijuana growing operations. That was a policy in Boulder County that it's a huge electricity consumption going on with growing pot inside. And so they had to pay a fee for their electricity per kilowatt hour, or sign up with a community solar garden. So there's policies like that can incentivize agrivoltaics. Then we get into Colorado Agrivoltaic. Now, the Jack Solar Garden is named Jack because of it's the grandfather of Byron Kominick, who came back from working overseas for a long time to his grandfather's farm, started figuring out how to build an agrivoltaic farm. And then he has gone and done the next step of founding this nonprofit, Colorado Agrivoltaic Learning Center. So we want to, teach is a big part of Colorado Agrivoltaic Learning Center for the next generation of sustainability leaders with policymakers, students, community, and all about clean energy, local food, and responsible land use. So Allison is our in-house, her ever expanding job. She was hired as the education director. She's gotten hundreds of high school students through there, developed on tours of the farm. She's developed science curriculum, and she's working on AP US government curriculum. That's hands-on science projects for the kids at the farm, measuring the same stuff the researchers are out there measuring. And then she's also expanded her role into overseeing a lot of policy stuff. So she's going to get into talking about that more. But part of our learning is teaching solar developers. We got a webinar coming up, 2 days on site, not a webinar, in person, 2 days at site to see the farm and talk about ways to build, ways to optimize, all that sort of thing. And then we've got some webinars coming up for farmers about Colorado specific crops that work well in agrivoltaic setting. And then in addition, we're on the community side, we're doing a ton of outreach to land trusts. So Nature Conservancy, American Farmland Trust, Colorado Cattlemen's Land Trust, Colorado Open Trust. So we're doing tons of outreach, meeting with all sorts of local, state, and federal government people. So it's really a hopping nonprofit. And here's a photo of, no, never mind. Allison will be getting into this.
No problem.
Okay, Allison,
Got it.
do you want me to keep driving or do you want to drive?
I'll do it.
Okay.
Whoops, 1 sec, sorry, people. There we go. Okay, everybody good? Cool. All right,
Yeah.
so we wanted to talk about, we'll talk about policy, but also we wanted to talk about how agrivoltaics is specifically growing in Colorado. So here's a few examples that should be online in the next year or so. So Chatfield Farms, which is a branch of the Denver Botanic Gardens, is going to have an agrivoltaic farm. This one's going to be super similar to Jack's. It's supposed to be about a megawatt of power, and it should be about 4 acres of single axis tracking. And they're hoping to grow vegetables underneath and distribute those through a CSA model. Another one pretty near Jack's is the Griffiths 1 solar project. So this one's a bit larger. This one's 44 acres, so about 10 times the size of Jack's. And this is the one that will have the largest Habitat Hero pollinator garden that is also supporting birds and other organisms. And then we keep getting bigger in size. So you're seeing all the orders of magnitude of the different types of solar in Colorado. So we start with 4, 40, and then 475 is a utility scale size project in Delta County. This one caused a lot of drama. I don't know if anybody's heard about this one, but the first time around when they tried to get it approved, the commissioner said no to it. And so they had to then integrate sheep into it to make it an agrivoltaic project. They also had to integrate an irrigation system that will keep that forage for the grass, for the animals growing well. And then they added apiaries or beehives onto it as well. And it finally got the go ahead, I think, earlier this year. So that should come online soon.
Allison, can I ask how much power a 475 acre installation would put out?
That should be about 100 megawatts.
Okay.
Generally, they say about 4 acres per megawatt. So yeah, that one should be about 100 megawatts. And that's pretty, I guess, on the smaller side, maybe for utility scale, because I think some places in Indiana are going to be almost 10,000 acres. So they just keep getting bigger. So we're going to talk a little bit about the legislation that's already passed. So the first one passed a couple of years ago in 2021, and that one just really gave us a definition of what agrivoltaics was, and also provided $150,000 for research. But it was kind of under the umbrella of soil health, so it wasn't a standalone bill just on agrivoltaics. The next one that was passed this year was mainly about agrivoltaics, but also a little bit about float voltaics, which is going to be when you're putting solar panels over some sort of body of water like canals or reservoirs. So mostly what we're going to talk about is the agrivoltaics part. So this one got signed a couple of weeks ago, actually, at Jack's Solar Garden. So here you see the governor at Jack's, and he brought his dog. You can see his little dog wandering about. She literally did not care about anybody, just followed her own beat, walking around and having a good time. But so this was signed a couple of weeks ago. So what it did is it creates this stakeholder task force to study what are the potentials for agrivoltaics here in Colorado? What kind of policy solutions can allow us to have more agrivoltaics? So that task force, I think, is going to be created by the end of September. So hopefully we'll get to talk to some of those people once they're convened together. It also amended that definition of agrivoltaics that was in that earlier bill, and it was more inclusive. It included things like cover cropping and providing habitat for pollinators and insects. Another big part of it was a personal property tax exemption. So this is an incentive for people to incorporate agrivoltaics into solar arrays. And so that allows people to not pay like their local county personal property taxes if they incorporate that. And then another large portion of it was funding for demonstration projects and research projects. So this got about $500,000 of grant funding for people that want to work the land or create an agrivoltaic project in Colorado. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that personal property tax exemption. So this is the part of the bill where it talks about it. And so there were all sorts of different things that you had to make changes to your solar array in order for you to be able to get that property tax exemption. So you have some sort of novel design. So at Jack Solar Garden, we elevated the panels, but other people are looking at new configurations of solar where you have bifacial that are vertical. So there's different ways that you can do agrivoltaics. And these are the different ways that they put into there. So things like a novel design or elevating them at least 6 feet off the ground or using translucent panels. All these things require quite a bit of money in order to get that personal property tax exemption. Then we get to number 5, and this one kind of got added at the last minute and it didn't get as much attention, I think, as it needed. So it says that you modify your wire management system. So it includes raising, lowering, or burying your wires. So it wasn't specific enough, like where else are you going to put the wires for your system? So that one I needed, I think, a little bit more working over and making sure that that actually required people to do agrivoltaics in that. So we'll see how that plays out. Hopefully people still are going to utilize this in ways that will actually improve the land stewardship underneath of the panels, is our hope. So quickly, we'll go over a few other states that have agrivoltaic legislation. So Illinois has one. It basically gives you a preference in line for being able to be approved by the state. So they prioritized things like, are you placing it on a brown field? Are you going to do pollinator habitat? Are you going to do some sort of agrivoltaics? And so you get points and you get moved up the line if you're doing more of these things that include agrivoltaic or other qualitative aspects. But those aren't necessarily compatible. Like you can't really do siting on a brown field plus agrivoltaic. So it's kind of interesting to see the different priorities and how that will play out. Massachusetts, so they are trying to, this was the first one that was passed, and they actually pay, you get more money per kilowatt hour from the state. So you get 6 cents per kilowatt hour added to what money you're making. So that's a pretty big incentive for people to incorporate agrivoltaics in that state. Michigan has a mandate for you have to have some sort of pollinator habitat and you get a score for it. And so I think there's like a minimum score for your solar array. And so that one is a specific mandate. Minnesota is pretty similar, but it's a voluntary program. You don't have to go into it. But it seems like they have a ton of pollinator habitat agrivoltaics there. And so it seems like most people are buying into that program in Minnesota. New York just passed recently. And so if you kind of similar to Colorado, that novel dual use aspect of it allows you to move up higher again, like in those RFE bid preferences. So you'll get moved further up the line and you'll get to build your project sooner rather than later if you incorporate those types of things. And then California has a state law. It's still in the works. It should be similar to Colorado's, but I'm not sure that the grant programming might not get any funding is what we've heard so far. But that one is still in the works. So we did not include that because it's not been passed. And then this is where I really can get nerded out. So if somebody wants to stop me at some point, that's totally fine. But so I am really digging deep into the county level land use code for solar siting because that's really where projects are approved or not, right? So county commissioners and planning departments are the ones that actually say yes or no to these projects. So some states like Illinois and California have actually overridden their local government control, and they say the state is able to say, if the county says no, the state can say, too bad, we're still going to build it there. Couple other states are considering it in the Midwest, so Michigan and Indiana. And so it's kind of unclear whether this will help people get more renewables, or if it's just going to create problems and kind of a legislative mess. So we're not really sure if that's a great idea. And so what we see in the county level stuff is that it counties vary widely in how much regulation they have, how specific they are, if they actually have any regulation relating to land use code. We found a couple counties in Colorado that proudly do not have any zoning regulations whatsoever. So that's interesting. So here we're looking at, this is where we started the project, was just looking at Boulder County and Weld County, which Boulder County is where Jack Solar Garden is located, and Weld County is directly to the east of us. So different regulation. So the largest solar array that's allowed in Boulder County is going to be 14 acres, whereas Weld County will allow you to go up to 30 megawatts. So that's going to be, for 120 acres. Some of them, it even says you can go up to 320 acres, but only 30 megawatts can be on agriculturally zoned land. So some of the requirements, so in Boulder County, if you are taller than 15 feet tall, you have to have some sort of screening, which means you would have to have vegetation that would block the view. So some counties are more sensitive to view shed changes because of solar arrays, whereas this one is only if you have a residential neighbor, you would have to worry about that. Again, setbacks vary, things like that. And then one last thing I wanted to mention is the decommissioning. So almost every county requires you to have some sort of decommissioning plan for when this thing goes out of service. The only difference is here is that Boulder County did not require a decommissioning bond or for you to demonstrate that you have the funds to decommission it. And so especially for smaller community solar gardens, that's going to be a pretty big barrier if you have to set aside a couple $100,000 to decommission your project. So we've only found a couple instances where they actually talk about the interaction between solar and agricultural land. So I'm going to talk really quickly about those. There's one in Montgomery, New York. So this allows you, if you are incorporating some sort of dual use agriculture, it allows you to increase the size of your solar array from 20 acres up to 40 acres and allows you to increase the lot coverage from 40% up to 75%. So that allows you to make a bigger solar array if you're still going to take care of that land underneath the solar panels. Another county is St. Louis Obispo. And so this one allows you to go through an easier permitting process and also doesn't require you have an open space easement. So those are just hurdles to get your project off the ground in the beginning. If you incorporate these techniques, which basically allow agriculture to still go on. So all of these techniques are centered around reducing soil disturbance and compaction. So one of the things is you don't have concrete footers on your solar panels. So that just reduces the amount of disturbance you have in your soil. And a couple other techniques that basically allow you to take care of that soil, doesn't compact it too much, which is very important if you are going to be able to continue cultivating that land in some way. If you beat your land up, only thing that's going to grow back in there is going to be weeds and nothing that an animal wants to eat. And your plants are really going to struggle to get their roots through the soil if it's super compacted and beat up. And then we just recently found one very big example of dual use in Colorado. So there's 2 counties. Like I said, we're looking at all 64 counties. We have about a third of them done so far. So looking at every single one, not much about agrivoltaics so far. The only one that we've seen is Yuma and Cheyenne counties, which are to the east along the eastern side of the state. They encourage you to locate predominantly on non-prime farmland. So we don't know. We're going to try to reach out to these county commissioners or planning department and say, what does that mean, encourage? Would you say no to it if it was on prime farmland? Or is it just something written in a regulation? So we're investigating, and hopefully we'll be able to provide more context to that later. And then I'll let Cindy, you want to talk about the federal bill that just recently came out? You're on mute.
Okay. This is a lot of words on here, but I wanted to let you know that it's been introduced bipartisan in the Senate, Democrat and Republican. And they're directing the U.S. Department of Agriculture to look into this whole agrivoltaic thing, define it, look at the land types, how to scale it, economically, as well as agriculturally and land production, and enhancing biodiversity. So I've just tried to underline some particular words that I thought might get you guys linked up and be interested in. And I don't know if you ever, do you know what, I've never heard of this, USDA's Agricultural Research Services. But it looks like they have regional offices, and they're going to investigate how agrivoltaics can increase the productivity and profitability of the land, the resilience of the agriculture, and protect biodiversity. And, you know, it's authorizing $15 million per year for 5 years. So just wanted to introduce you to that. See if you can leverage that somehow, or whatever your network is with your regenerative agriculture community. Okay, Allison.
Okay. Yeah, so then we wanted to tailor this a little bit to you guys. So hopefully this is good information. So I was talking with some of our farmers from Sprout City Farms and talking about how they utilize regenerative agriculture practices at Jack's. And so one that they talked about was they really try to minimize soil disturbances. So this was a hay field prior to going into vegetable production. And so when they started forming those beds and making those 3 rows of beds, they did have to come through with a tractor and rip it and till it at the very beginning. But since then, they have had no-till practices, and so that they keep that soil structure intact as they're working through it. And the same kind of vein, so keep soil covered, so don't have any bare soil. They do a lot of cover cropping in off seasons, and kind of maintaining and a lot of mulching as well. So living things and non-living things, which gets us to the next one, right? So keep something living. So a lot of their cover cropping was done all over the winter time, so that soil is not left bare and is able to be held in place by those roots and less, water and wind erosion. And then the last one that they really utilize at Jack's Solar Garden is they're going to maximize crop diversity. I was talking with the farmer, they have over 20 different crops, and then probably somewhere between 2 to 8 different varieties within that to see which ones are going to do best with that extra shade. And then they're working on intercropping. So they just planted this week some onions with kale in between. You can see different types of greens here mixed together. And then they've added some flowers to help bring the pollinators in as well for some of those fruiting crops. Another important part of regenerative agriculture is integrating livestock and bringing biology back into the soil. So we don't really do that, but you can see a lot of other examples of agrivoltaics that are integrating sheep in order to graze that grass. So that cuts down on the fossil fuels needed for keeping that grass from, shading those panels, and also helps bring, fungus and all sorts of different living things back into the soil and really create that soil microbiome as well. We would really like to push people to think about larger animals, things like cows, things like pigs, that can also be integrated in. right now, all of our land is in research, and so that would probably add a pretty big variable to just bring animals into it in the middle of their research project. So can't really do that at Jax right now, but I think the long-term goals after research is done is Byron would love to have some animals out there. So obviously I am not an expert on regenerative agriculture. So if you guys have any things that you would like to add to the conversation, we'd love to talk about that now.
I'm curious too, Valley, did you say that your group was involved in the Colorado Agrivoltaic bill?
So we weren't actually involved in like the writing and the drafting of the bill, but it was one of our priority bills that we supported as an organization. Yeah, I mean, I was kind of thinking of this funny story when I was testifying in the last week of session for this bill, and it came up in the House Agriculture Committee, and how there was kind of this idea of there was several legislators that were on that panel who were sort of like on the fence about it, and a lot of the constituents in their district worked in, were in rural areas and worked in farming, but they mentioned sort of this divide between the environmental movement and farmers, and I think that it's fascinating, and I'm sure Allison, you've probably seen that a lot as well, and like, thought about that, but my takeaway from it was that there is sort of that idea that like, if you're trying to save the environment, then you're against farming. And I remember having this conversation with one of these legislators and saying like, that's absolutely not true from our perspective. Like we're not out here to get rid of farming and devalue the work that you're doing. And all in all, what was great was that they all ended up voting for it, and it passed unanimously out of that committee. But I think it just brings up that point that it's interesting to think on, which is, there has been sort of for a long time, I think that divide, and I don't know if that's fair, and it's even, again, I know environmentalists don't feel that way. So anyway, I don't know if that really answers your question, but that was part of my involvement in the bill. And then we had we had a regenerative agriculture team in our legislative action group, and we had a couple other people that testified for this bill when it was in other committees. So I know our partners, Colorado Coalition for a Livable Climate, and Duncan Gilchrist, who used to be with 350, he was one of the bill drafters that wrote some of the language in the bill. I think he was probably at the signing as well. I'm sure you probably know him, Allison, but yeah, that's sort of the extent of our involvement.
So was there particular language in the bill that spoke to regenerative agriculture?
No, I mean, I think that, from that angle, we were really just interested in the idea of, taking agricultural space and making it dual use, right? So it's like you can have your agriculture there, but you can also have sustainable energy, that is also in that same, kind of that same area. So we never really I see what you're asking, and I guess we never really approached that bill from the perspective of like, how do we make agrivoltaics, fit with, regenerative agriculture? But I think we just saw the potential of these systems, and the people in the committee, when we brought it up, were just really excited about, the possibilities. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's nascent in policymaking, and like that federal bill and the Colorado Agrivoltaic bill. I mean, the first step is defining agrivoltaics, so it may be a really good leverage point for you all to get in there to make sure there's something about regenerative included in that. Yeah,
what was so interesting about this bill was it fit into all three camps that I work in, which is our legislative action, our renewable energy, and our regenerative agriculture. And so we could have easily done this presentation tomorrow in our renewable energy committee. But I just, I like the way that it fit in here and how the people in this committee have sort of been following it throughout the session. So.
Nice. Yeah, I just want to say like the rural thing. It's tough. It's a lot of our education is going to have to be focused on landowners where they're getting misinformation and also feeling like this is going to affect their communities in a negative way. So really trying to get that information out there that this can help farm viability for lots of different people, and how you can still utilize that land for, ranching, for vegetable production, for any sort of agricultural activities that you can imagine, basically.
And that federal bill, agrivoltaic bill really emphasizes the rural economic development part of it as well. So lots of opportunity there.
Yeah, definitely. And so I didn't know if y'all were done, because I had a few questions, but if you had some more slides to go through, I don't want to stop you.
It's really, go ahead, Allison. You had
I
your,
can stop. Do you want me to keep going? Yeah, so we
well,
just
you had your
um,
county. Oh,
that was it. That was it for policy. This was just things that we are thinking about as an organization, about opportunities that we think for agrivoltaics to grow. But sorry, my husband ended up being out of town today. So I might have to step off for just 1 second. I'll let Cindy handle this slide.
okay, I think this is the point of this slide is just to show how do we scale this? We got Jack Solar Garden at 4 acres and 1.2 megawatts. And so, there are, as we've already described, projects on the horizon that are bigger, and coming up with the technology. Now that, at Jack Solar Garden, half of the material cost is steel. So it's about equal. I mean, it's about equal to what the solar panels cost. So the more you elevate it with steel, the way we've got it, it's expensive. So solar developers aren't going to do that voluntarily. So that's where you get into your policy side and your incentivizing, and then your, the criteria for request for proposals. But there's ways to improve the technology, and how can that be done? So that's one way to look at it. And then the other is this grants to land managers, and this picture actually is retrofitting an existing solar PV. So you can see, well, you're not, I don't know if I'm not sharing it, so you're not seeing my cursor, but it's these are not elevated very high, and they're fixed. So they're just facing south. So they're digging these basins and then trying to grow herbs in them and other perennials. So there's that retrofit aspect too, if we can go with grants to land managers. Okay, next slide. If Allison's there. Allison's there. The other opportunities to scale are, this whole utility evaluation criteria. And this is somewhere where your regenerative agriculture committee could weigh in too. I mean, right now, up here under roughly the standard, it's the price that the developer can get. Is there a secured site? Is it an experienced developer? Secured finances, low middle income off-takers can take advantage of it, and some consideration if it's community owned, but nothing about land stewardship in there, nothing about the type of agriculture in there, or biodiversity. And so potential standards could be this, and just shifting percentages around and including land stewardship, for example, in there. Okay, Allison, click.
Yep.
And then this conservation tax thing, the way I understand it is that there's nothing in the federal IRS tax code that excludes solar arrays from being on conservation easement lands that receive federal tax credits. So it's a way of finding a land trust like the Nature Conservancy or American Farmland Trust that's interested in and willing to create a program to improve land stewardship within a solar array on conservation easement land. So lots of policy work that can be investigated and advocated for. All right. The next opportunity to scale is just potentially getting a third party in there to certify give it the stamp. Like energy efficient appliances have the stamp of the Energy Star program, or organic crops have the USDA organic stamp. So some kind of certifying agency that can say this is agrivoltaics. Next. And then here you see Allison, Education and Policy Director. Byron, our Executive Director, and then Alexandra's a new person on staff doing the fundraising and events. And so she's collaborating actually with EcoCycle, and we're doing a big festival fundraising, joint fundraising with EcoCycle out at Jack Solar Garden on July 15th. So come on out if you're interested. Live music, food, tours of Jack Solar Garden, and tours of the nation's first electric compost collection vehicle from EcoCycle. All right. We're
Look at that, 7:30 on the dot.